to go and stand up over here or have a little wander about. Thank you, Joanne. Now, forgive me, it has been a lively few weeks, which is why I've got man flu. So forgive that slightly croaky. I'll try not to cough into your ears. Do I get the sense that people are a little bit fragile, a bit too much dancing to the Beatles last night? You know, I saw people, on the Mersey there, hoping that the air would clear that last whiskey they had late last night. NAPF, bit late night, was it? I can see that. I am honoured to be here, particularly honoured as your conference was opened by Sir Bob. Are we all here for Sir Bob? Is he on good form? He is a man, of course, a legend at the BBC. I followed him on something that's called the Hostile Environment course. If you go to a war zone, the BBC, because it cares deeply for us, brackets, because the insurers insist on it, insist on us going on a hostile environment course, one bit of which is where we're taken hostage to practice our technique. So black bags are put on our heads. We are held at gunpoint. We're assured that there are not real bullets, but the squaddies are real enough who take us. And the question is, you're supposed to be taught techniques as to how to deal with this. Now, Sir Bob became famous for the way in which he dealt with this. Because as he was bundled into the back of a vehicle, or about to be bundled into the back of the vehicle, the choice, you're told later, and he'd obviously heard this, is do you play kind of very low key in the hope that your captors let you out later, or do you leg it? The local police force had a phone call from a man saying, there's a man I could swear looks like Bob Geldof running down the road, being chased by a man with a rifle, and this guy, an Irishman, is shouting, "Fuck off!" as he runs down the street. And this guy from the course was saying, "Bob, it's over now, you can come back." And Bob was like running down the street. So I hope he was as entertaining to you as he was to us when he was doing that. Now, I come here slightly nervous, actually, to speak to a large audience like this, because the curiosity about my job is, of course, you never see the people you're actually broadcasting to. Night after night, I stand outside Downing Street, an empty building, in the dark, quite often in the rain. Has anybody ever wondered why? Yeah, I can tell you the answer. I haven't the faintest bloody idea why they do it, but they think it's a good idea. But it also means, as well as kind of addressing your told millions of people and not seeing any of them, which is why it's unnerving to actually see the faces here, I also do the radio in the morning quite often. Often, if any listeners to the Today programme here? Yeah. So I'm quite often on the Today programme, which I have to say, just so that I don't do a monstrously long day, I am able to do that from home. Little basement I have with a microphone. But it means there's that curious thing, which is you are broadcasting to lots of people, but you can forget it very easily. You're just there with your headphones and your microphone. And on one occasion, I said to my children, I said, "Daddy's going on the radio. Will you be very, very quiet? Please, Mummy's away, and I need you to be quiet." They were 16 and 14 at the time. No, they were toddlers. And so I sent them upstairs, and I was in fact interviewing somebody else. I was interviewing, do you remember Senator George Mitchell, the man who was in charge of the Northern Ireland peace process? I was interviewing George Mitchell, and he is one of those kind of thoughtful, grey-haired American senators who pauses before giving you an answer. And so, just as I would say, "Do you think Gerry Adams is a man of peace?" is what I was going to ask him. Just as I was beginning my question, I heard this, "Daddy!" And you face one of those moments, have you ever had that where you have to choose between your career and your children? And of course, the reason we're here in Liverpool today is because we've chosen our careers. And so I ploughed on with my question. I said, "Do you think Gerry Adams is a man of peace?" And he paused, said, "Well, Mr. Robinson," paused, "Daddy! We're locked in!" Took 3.5 hours to edit 3.5 minutes worth of tape for what is still referred to in the BBC library as the Daddy We're Locked In peace process interview. So I am a bit nervous, but I'm going to try and answer Joanne's question, which is politics, why bother? And the reason I would suggest to you why bother is because of what you're in business to do. All of you assess risk. That's what you do all the time. You make judgments about the long term, not the short term, about risk. And politics now, I would suggest to you, is a significant risk factor that you're all probably having to take into account, or if you're not doing your job properly, because there's a lot that you do need to take into account. When you try and consider the risks in politics, it reminds me of an old story that used to be told of John Major meeting Boris Yeltsin. Yeltsin, a Russian leader, at a time when the Russian economy was in a terrible state. And the British Prime Minister turned to him and said, look, I've heard a lot about it. I've heard some very bad things about the state of the economy in your country, but I really want to hear it from you in your words. How would you sum up the state of the Russian economy? And Yeltsin listened to the translation and then decided he'd try and answer in English. So he went, good. Nothing more. Major paused, still nothing. Says to Yeltsin, well, when I said sum it up briefly, feel free to go a little bit further. Yeltsin listened to the translation, then said, not good. and it seems to me, that is not a bad sum up of where I would be if I were thinking about the political risks, investing the huge sums of money that all you guys have to invest. What's the good, first of all? The good is clear. We have political stability in this country in a way that you frankly would not have predicted. We all grew up, if you cared about such things at school, being told that hung parliaments were very insecure, coalitions were not very English or not very British, they would produce instability. Well, whether you like this government or you loathe it, it's certainly proved to be stable. Stable, clear, not going to end before the election. People endlessly went on about the fact it would end before the election. It won't, in my view, end before the election. That is good news, whether you like it or loathe it. On the economy, growth is good. Unemployment, the figures are very good last week. Inflation figures very good. Economic growth good. So plenty of reasons to think in the good camp, as far as Boris Yeltsin would have put it. What's the not good camp? Well, the economic risks are growing once again. The Eurozone crisis. The sense that China is creating a problem. The sense that there are global conflicts, whether in the Middle East or elsewhere, that's a problem. Ebola, of course, is a problem. And then my world politics, the real sense of uncertainty about what the next election could bring and what the immediate aftermath might bring, and what, if there is a Conservative-led government, a referendum on the EU might lead to. So a period of not good in terms at least of risk and trying to assess where they are. Now, I'm a great fan of elections. Many of you will not be. Partly because, campaigns are fun. Do you remember that moment with Mrs. Duffy in the last campaign? Yeah, Gordon Brown? I tried cheering Gordon Brown up after that, actually. I said, look, Prime Minister, it could have been a whole lot worse. He didn't look instantly convinced, Joanne, I have to say. Oddly. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, look, do you not remember the moment Charles Kennedy, who was leader of the Liberal Democrats, took a camera crew in while campaigning? He took a camera crew into a hospital. And he went up, forgive me, I'm going to use you as a prop. He went up to the patient. The cameras are all looking in. They're all rolling. And he said, do you mind me asking you, sir, how are you? And this guy's sort of, surrounded in bags and blood and all this sort of thing. How are you going to vote? Liberal Democrat comes the answer. Perfect. Then Charles Kennedy did what we call in journalism the question too far. Do you ever have it in business? It's like, why did I ask that question? If it just going to roll it back, it would have been fine. Question too far. And what are you in hospital for, sir? Brain surgery. Not good. Jack Straw famously, I told Gordon Brown, Jack Straw famously went into an old people's home with a camera crew and said to the gentleman, he said, do you know who I am? To which the gentleman said, no, but matron's sure to know. So you have to be careful. So elections are fun, but elections are certainly unpredictable. And in a sense, we're in one long-running election, aren't we? Really dating back to those May elections in which we saw the rise of UKIP in the local elections, in the Euro elections, running through the by-elections we're having now, and clearly the Scottish referendum as well. And what do those tell us, really, about the state of politics? First and foremost, they tell us that the electorate are mad as hell. I don't mean mad crazy, I mean mad angry. And it's very interesting for me coming back to Liverpool again. This is not my home city, Manchester's my home city, so I usually, hold my nose before coming here to Liverpool. But politically, it's very interesting to come to Liverpool. for the memories it has for me, forgive me, in my early 50s. My memory is of the 80s being a time of conflict and division, particularly, of course, in this great city. And I assumed that after we had the global financial collapse and banking, we'd see a repeat. Thank you. We'd see a repeat of the sort of anger. We'd see a repeat possibly of that sort of music, punk. We'd see a repeat of industrial unrest. We'd see a repeat of people on the streets, the riots that scarred Toxteth in 1981. Not a bit of it. What was striking about this period in politics has been how peaceful it's been. That the riots of 2011 actually seem like the exception, not the rule. That workers took extraordinary pay restraint, if not pay cuts, in order to maintain their jobs. That there is very little political anger on the streets. And yet, I would argue to you, the anger's there all right, but it's just manifesting itself in a different way. It's not through an anger of rebellion, in the sense of on the streets, perhaps because people grew up in that period and thought, what did that change? Not very much. So the anger is coming out through the ballot box sometimes, through the opinion poll, through Twitter, through an expression of rage, which sometimes, I don't want to imply that every UKIP voter is furious, though I think a lot of them are. I don't certainly want to suggest that anybody who voted yes in the Scottish referendum was angry. But the difference between the core third, who'd always been in favour of a independent Scotland, and the 45% was made up by a lot of very cross people indeed. We've seen that Westminster has become a term of abuse, something that's never happened before in my lifetime, in the way that Washington is in the United States. And we've seen extraordinary high volatility in politics, speed of change. So great election watchers, poll watchers, psephologists told me there's no way that yes can catch up, the speed of change, oh look at this graph, history. Boy did they catch up. Like that. The change from the Commonwealth Games through to that poll that showed yes ahead, even if you dispute whether yes was just ahead or just behind, that's not the point. They closed the gap. And that 6 weeks, ladies and gentlemen, is the same length as our general election campaign will be, to give you a sense of what can change and at what speed. So I think all of those things will affect our politics. And remember, it is a global phenomenon. I saw my favourite poll finding yesterday, which was in America where there are midterm elections. They asked people how popular, or rather I ought to say how unpopular, their politicians were. The breaking news, ladies and gentlemen, is politicians in America are slightly more unpopular than head lice. It is happening around the world. Now, what does all that mean? It means for you, the unpredictability of the election is increased. If you believe in these probability models, and a lot of you will use that in your investment life, I know, there is one model done by an Oxford University academic called Stephen Fisher, for people who are interested. He's got a website called Elections, etc., looking at feeding the polls in and giving you a probability on the outcome. It's a good old model, but it's not terribly helpful just now. Tory majority, 25% probability. Labour majority, 21% probability. Hung Parliament, Labour in the lead, 27% possibility. Hung Tory, 28%. Roughly summed up, my father would have put it from Yorkshire, bugger knows. I mean, it's that close. Those four key variable outcomes really effectively all equal probabilities. And that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, that no opposition has recovered from a position as bad as Labour's was after the last election in one leap. Partly because no government has increased its support from one election to the next since 1955 and Eden, in the way that it would have to happen for the Tories to win. But the other and newer factors I've already mentioned, which is the rise of UKIP. Now, UKIP seems to me is Mrs. Duffy writ large. It is that sense of anger about the way the world has changed, about people who thought they understood their values, their place in the world, that there would be safety and security for them and their grandchildren, their children and their grandchildren. Now, how big will UKIP be? The honest answer, nobody knows. But only 6 months ago, people were saying to me, it'll be just like the last election. If you remember, you won't follow the detail of this probably, but UKIP got just 3% at the last general election. In the Euro elections, before that, 2009, they got 16%. They did almost as well as they did in these Euro elections. But there is not the slightest sign of that pattern being repeated. In the latest opinion poll, UKIP are on 19%. Even if there is a squeeze, and frankly I think there will be a squeeze because that old wasted vote argument has always worked against third, fourth, fifth parties. Even if there's a squeeze, you can see UKIP getting 10, 12, 15, the sort of numbers that mean it may not win very large numbers of seats, it may be a handful, it may be as many as 10, but it will change the outcome in dozens. The latest cephalological analysis is it will gift to Labour about 20 seats. So that is a Tory wound. But interestingly, there's a figure about 15% in the polls that if UKIP gets there or thereabouts, it starts to damage Labour rather than to help it. So it's very unpredictable and depends on how it operates on the ground in particular areas. Then you've got the rise of the SNP, which is a problem for Labour. Now, many people here who are not Scots or are not based in Scotland may have taken their eye off the Scottish politics. What has happened since the referendum, and it's worth pausing to think about this, is a doubling, ladies and gentlemen, a doubling of SNP support. The SNP got 6 MPs with 20% of the poll last time. They're now on 40% of the poll. And they won't just, if they were able in any sense to replicate that at a general election, double their representation. They'd quadruple or quintuple their representation. That would be Labour losing perhaps 20 seats. And that's why these projections are so unpredictable, working out these gains and losses from these extra factors which we've not seen before. And what that means, of course, is that you might not get a simple coalition. I mean, you certainly might not get one party winning, but you might not get the possibility of a simple coalition with the Lib Dems helping Labour or the Tories to form a government. It may be that, as we have in Europe, that you have to have multi-party coalitions. And imagine if you're a party leader having to go to Alex Salmond's party, now Nicola Sturgeon's. Imagine if you're having to go to the Democratic Unionist Party. Imagine if you're going to Nigel Farage, the price that they will want to extract. And they may not agree to a coalition, they almost certainly wouldn't, but if they do what's called in the jargon in Westminster, supply and confidence, crudely, we keep you in government, we don't bring you down, but you have to come and haggle with us for everything you want. Imagine how different that is from the stability we've had with the coalition in recent years. And in part, that is because of an anger that I was talking about and the fact that people now in politics are interested on who's on their side. There's a very interesting analysis done that my colleague Robert Preston has blogged about today by the chief economist at the Bank of England, who basically argues that there is a mixture in our economy of agony and ecstasy. The ecstasy is the rapid economic growth, as well as the extraordinary job creation, defying all the predictions. You know, remember some were predicting 4 or 5 million unemployed? The agony is that for all bar the best paid and the best educated, you've got less job security and you've got lower wages. And you've got the suppression of wage growth unseen in generations, possibly unseen ever in truth, for people who are in work. And that combination is very potent. And that means that parties are, and I think you in this industry may feel you're suffering from it, are competing to look as if they're on your side. The model they're looking at is the United States. People here often, and in Europe, tend to think that President Obama was a shoo-in for a second term because Europeans tend to like him. Actually, he was a massively unpopular president. It was something of a coup that he managed to get re-elected. Mitt Romney had economic credibility as well. All the polling showed he had. But the reason Obama was able to win was in large part because he portrayed Romney as on the side of the rich while he was on the side of the ordinary guy. Now, Mitt Romney didn't help himself, it has to be said. He famously, in a debate, stood at one of these podiums like this and said to another candidate in the primaries, he said, "I'll bet you $10,000 you're wrong." It's not good if you're trying to get the support of people who earn $20,000 a year to put casually $10,000 on the table. He was famously asked whether he liked football, and the truth is he doesn't, but trying to look like an ordinary guy, Romney said, yes, 2 of my friends own teams. Can you imagine what the spin doctor said when he got there? He's like, no, you were kind of trying to do no, it's just not the right way. But my favourite story about Romney, about how he really demonstrated to people he wasn't on their side, was when he had to reveal that he was fitting an elevator, a lift, in his house. So what, you might say. It was in his holiday house. So what, you might say. People have holiday house. It was an elevator for his Cadillac, so he didn't have to walk up the stairs having driven the car home. This was not good for his electability. But my underlying point is, people are desperate to show that they're on the side of the voters. So what that means for the people in this room, I think, is when you do your probabilities, let me give you a 100% probability, a 100% likelihood. All political parties will compete to be the consumer's champion against business. They will be the ones that say, give us more transparency, give us better consumer service, drive down costs. Because as politicians with no money to spend, who can't promise very much, as politicians whose own trust ratings are very low, their best hope is to be on the side of the consumer against you, or against the broker who advises people who are dealing with your products, or with taking money out of your pension funds. That is where all the political parties will be. And in a sense, you can see that with some of the competing around pensions policy, can't you? For George Osborne, the appeal at the last minute before that budget of saying, I can't really promise to give people money, but boy, I can promise to let them get hold of their own money, that's quite appealing. Look at the coverage in the Mail, look at the coverage in the Telegraph every single day, and you'll see why that was irresistible for someone who is trying to find an appeal to his electorate. Equally for Labour, when you hear them talk about taxes on the rich, mansion taxes, regulation of the energy market, the electricity market, regulation of the pensions industry in order to help people get a better consumer deal, it's irresistible as a way of saying that they are basically on your side. So I just want to end, before maybe we take a question or two, to say, in a sense, don't despair in this period of change. I was thinking as I was coming up here, reading about all the challenges in the world, that, we've lived through SARS and bird flu, so we can do Ebola as well. We've lived through wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. We've lived through the banking crisis and the Asian bubble, the tech bubble and the millennium bug. All the people in this room, I suspect, have, in their business lives, have gone through that. But if it ever feels miserable, remember the words of John Major again. Not a man you'd think I'd be quoting once, let alone twice, I suspect. John Major, when he had his cabinet gathered around him, and one of those grim days before that terrible landslide defeat by Tony Blair, said, ladies and gentlemen, when your backs are to the wall, turn round and fight.